if you want to do a lunar talisman, you must become the Hierophant of the moon. What does that mean? It means saturating your sphere of sensation with the energies of the lunar, hierarchy of correspondences and awakening.
You become a living talisman.
Exactly.
What if Western ceremonial magic has been missing something fundamental, not in our rituals or symbols, but in the way that we've lost touch with the very energy that makes magic work in the first place? Welcome to Season 2 of Voces Mysticae. I'm your host, Frater O.D, and I'm thrilled to launch our new season with a conversation that genuinely challenged my understanding of magical practice. In today's episode, I'm joined with Ike Baker. You know him as the host of the ARCANVM podcast. He's been on the show before, but he's an initiate of several Western esoteric lineages and some in the East, as we get into during our conversation. Today, I'm talking to him about his new work coming out through Llewellyn called Ætheric Magic. This work represents nothing less than a hermeneutic recalibration of ceremonial magic through the integration of Eastern energetic technologies within Western ritual frameworks like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And it's challenging us to recover what I think's been hidden in plain sight. Our conversation explores the dialectical tension between mind and body in Western traditions, and where Ike illuminates how our impoverished conceptual language has fractured our magical efficacy. Drawing from his background in both ceremonial lineages and in Eastern medicine, he articulates what many of us have sensed but probably couldn't name, and that authentic magical transformation occurs through the alchemical marriage of conscious awareness with the latent etheric substrate that permeates our very being. We're talking about being embodied. We also discuss his forthcoming immersive Egyptian expedition, which aims to recover theurgic technologies at the sacred source, potentially recontextualizing Western practices through direct embodied engagement with the land that birthed Hermetic wisdom. But here's the question that kept resurfacing for me in our dialogue. If Western magicians have been practicing with this fundamental disconnect between intellectual understanding and somatic intelligence, are we all just operating at half capacity? And could bridging this gap transform not just our magical results, but our very conception of what magic is? This is Voces Mysticae, where theory ignites practice, where whispers become incantations. We don't just talk about magic, we forge the keys that unlock its mysteries. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to anybody who doesn't know you already, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, so while I've been a ceremonialist for many years now, I've been practicing the Western ceremonial tradition and as well as Eastern forms of vision work, ritual, energy work, that kind of stuff for a sum total of about 21 years. I cut my teeth. I got my initial training, my proper training in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the Cicero lineage, and I run the Asheville Temple. I'm Imperator of the Asheville Temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm also Freemason, Freemasonic historian, and Martinist, a bunch of other stuff. I have a solo practice, obviously, that is very intense and very focused, believe it or not. But I have really spent a lot of time in both worlds. I try and keep a foot in both worlds. What's going on in contemporary solo practice, as well as because there's a lot of communication and exchange on that, particularly on internet forums and things like that. And just the people I talk to on a regular basis that are, authors and practitioners and scholars of this stuff. it's a real advantage of having a podcast that people want to come on. And but I have extensive training in order systems, meaning curriculum and things like that. So I can toggle between both. But I think what's most apropos this discussion is, my training in Eastern forms of medicine. I went to school for Asian body work, acupuncture, and Chinese herbalism. And I also studied Qigong. Got a certification in Reiki early on, and Tai Chi, martial arts, and things like that. So I'm also pretty well versed for a Westerner in that system, particularly because I studied with Asian people. And so there was there's only so much that can be divulged to Westerners. And that's not me speculating. That's, explicit. It's their admission. And I respect that. I totally respect that. But it's definitely less convoluted, I would say, of a way of learning Eastern systems. You're drinking from a little bit more of a pure stream, I would have to say.
Yeah, there tends to be less of a broken lineage in the East than what we experience here in the West, especially within, the more esoteric elements. That's really interesting. Yeah, and so you've obviously you've got the podcast ARCANVM, and you've got a book coming out, Ætheric Magic. Now, it's a wonderful piece, and I wrote a review about it, but I want to get into a few of the details about it on today's show, because I think it's really important for people. Specifically, this concept of etheric, ether. What is that for you? I love the way you display it in the book, but if you could give us a little bit of a taste of what that is in the book, like why choose this level of energy to deal with?
Well, it's that's the thing. We're kind of limited in our terminology because and this is another point that I think is really important for Westerners to consider. One of the reasons why I think it's less convoluted working with Eastern practitioners is because they come at it from a different mindset. They come at it with a different cultural perspective filter and a different cultural nuance. And so, we need to call things energy in order to wrap our sort of postmodern, skeptical, reductive materialist scientismic I won't call it scientific. It's because there's a scientism. It's like a religion for a lot of people. And so I don't want to call it scientific because most people aren't thinking scientifically. They're thinking religiously about science. So, so there's like all that to sort of battle through and cut through. In Asian culture, it's like it's chi. And the chi can refer to the energy, the life force, the as we would call it, the energy. They wouldn't call it energy. They'd call it life force, animating force. And or it could be what it does. Like, why is the sky blue? Well, because that's its chi. Why does
it's
air
nature.
Why does vapor rise? That's its chi. So there's a much more fluidity in the languaging and therefore the conceptual ideas, right? We are extremely limited in the West by our language. So we think rather than giving words and concepts a lot of play, we think that we need to hyper describe every little nut and bolt. And what happens is we have an overwhelming amount of words that many people do not understand and know how to use. And so they get corrupted and polluted, like words like narcissism and all this stuff, the pop psychology that's being thrown out there. I mean, words are losing their meaning with the internet.
Dramatically so.
Right. The advent of meme culture and needing to sort of label things and people constantly, habitually. It's really a downfall in our ability in the West to no pun intended, wrap our minds around what is going on. So the main point that I want to drive home is that, like, I had to call it energy because that's what, particularly in an introductory text, that is what most people would know it as, right? You'd know it as qigong, which we call energy work. You'd know it as pranayama, which we call energy work. They're talking about prana and chi, which are not energy the way we think of it. So the main thing is that I call it energy, but I really want to specify we don't know what it is, and that's okay. It's what the best terms for us to be able to use are descriptors. And so in the overwhelming Eastern literature, it's this energy is compared to mostly water. And so, you have different acupuncture points along the body that are, the sea of chi is an acupuncture point kind of deep to the center line. You have bubbling springs is kidney 1, which is an acupoint on the sole of the foot. And so a lot of these things are thought to flow. And you find that in the Western canon, when they discuss things, when Lévi, for instance, or Blavatsky, or any of these people who were willing to write about and talk about this stuff, and it's especially prevalent in alchemical texts, they talk about a fluidic fire, a light, right? Because fire is radiant, and we know that when people are alive, they are warm. So fire, heat indicates life archaically. We're thinking Renaissance traditions right now. And then when they're dead, they're cold. The fire has left them. The heat has left them. So an animating kind of, radiance, a heat that moves like water. You see that a lot, and so that's probably the best way to talk about it. And the reason I wanted to hone in on this type of thing is because it is absolutely essential. We're using it without realizing we're using it in things like magic, and a lot of people would call that new agey, but I explain in the book why it's not. And I explain that, actually the whole idea that, that it's just spirits doing this work is extremely reductive. And so there are vast canons that are preserved in Taoist literature dating to the BCE era that talk about traditions of talismanic consecration. Where are they calling in guardians and spirits of the quarters? Absolutely, like we do in the LBRP or the any of the rituals of the pentagram of Western ceremonial derived from the Golden Dawn. Sure. But they're also, explicitly so, putting their chi into this talisman because it's all a form of intelligent energy. So for instance, David Rankine used a phrase that I really liked. He called the forms with which we're able to identify these spirits we're working with as gateway images. They're just agreed upon images so that we can communicate with what is essentially a disembodied intelligence. So we're working with intelligent energies all the time. And we are the same. We're the same thing. We are our nervous system, but it's anchored in a form, the electricity, the all of that stuff, and all the attendant, quote unquote, etheric or energetic bodies. It's all anchored in physicality. Now, when we work with spirits, we know that that's not necessarily true. They don't have concrete embodied forms and they don't appear the same to everybody. And to be honest with you, there's absolutely no guarantee that they have to appear to us in anything that resembles their true form or intention or nature. Right. There's no guarantee. People are kidding themselves. But the thing is, everything is a form of intelligent energy, and it's really magic in and of itself is at the forefront of consciousness. consciousness studies. Either way, even let's just say hypothetically, yes, it's just these weird wispy spirits like Casper the Ghost. Either way, my consciousness is employed in the act of preparation and prayer and the crafting of circles and triangles and the acquisition and consecration of things like scrying mirrors and robes and swords and things like that, and then calling them forth. What's calling them forth? I'm calling them. I'm doing the call. My consciousness is vibrating that air, lighting the incense. So there's a lot more at play that the Eastern systems really have. And so we're missing that tremendous, really, we're missing 50% of the equation. And I noticed that because when I started training in Golden Dawn, and I didn't do this on purpose, I didn't think like, oh, I'll get both. I wanted to get into Chinese medicine. I wanted to get, really, I want to get out of allopathic Western paradigms because I was going for physical therapy. And that was, the Western paradigm of medicine is I'll tell you right now, it's, diffusely corrupt. So as I was learning, you go to school for Chinese medicine, you're learning about meridian theory, and they're making you do Qigong 3, 4, 5 days a week. I'm learning, I'm like, wait, hold on. Like these are two sides of the same coin. It's just not as explicit, and there's not as articulated and codified of an actual practice on the Western side. So as I was going through these rituals and developing my Western practice, I had the whole time sort of like a script running in the background or a filter running in the background, seeing how these two things worked together, practicing how they work together. And it turned really, really simple magic into extremely powerful magic. I did not have to do much because you're adding intentionality, and that's everything a lot of the time. Not just setting an intention, but I'm doing something intentionally. Like I am consciously utilizing this. There is I know what I'm doing, and my consciousness is focused and engaged. Isn't that the name of the game in magic? So that's to answer your question. That's probably several of the reasons why I decided to focus on this.
Well, no, I think that, thank you for that exposition for it, because I think you're right on a few points. Specifically, I want to touch on the overclassification of terms and the confusion around said terms, right? You're absolutely, there's a missing understanding, like a deep embodied understanding of what these things are, because we're so stuck here in the West. Everything in the West is so mentally based that the body never comes along, right? We're always dragging the body along with us, and it's the most foundational piece within magic. And I find more often than not, if I'm in my head and I'm trying to employ some sort of, let's just call it a spell, a rite, or whatnot, and I'm up here, then I'm missing what feels like 70, maybe 90% of my oomph, if you will, right? If I'm just trying to think my way through this, I'm not employing the best resources available to me, right? We are embodied. And thus the idea of not employing the body and all the other bodies around it, right? Let's just consider it as a whole, specifically the etheric body closest to us, right? That little field right about here, how weak the results can be for me, whether that's an internal transformation or something that I'm trying to affect within the world itself. I love how you touch on how foundational it is, and that without it, you're really missing a whole lot of the pie. And building that structure through practices like Qigong, meditation, even many of the bodywork systems that are available in the East, like Qigong, Tai Chi. Please get down. Okay. I've got a cat over here. He's like, hey, I want to join the conversation, but he's hearing about the energy. That's what it is. That it's funny you said that, because that was very much how I came at the Western system as well, was in tandem with Reiki training, with going to Qigong classes, things like that. And it was essential to my understanding of these energies and allowing me to feel them instead of just think about them. And it really is, for me at least, and I don't know if this resonates as well with you, it's a feeling thing. There is an intuitive body sense that kicks in when you foster it, when you bring it to life through these practices. Then you step into this arena of ritual, and that kind of kicks in as well. And you're working in concert between mind and body, bringing them together as what would they say in Japan? Kokoro, heart mind, some sort of a unified body and mind, rather than just trying to think my way through the process of this ritual. And what you've presented within the book, I think, really helps beginners start to grasp that and get past this reductionism that we deal with our poverty-stricken language.
Yeah, and there's a real pushback against, in like ceremonial traditions, and I would say people really ensconced necessarily in like Renaissance astrological magic. There's real pushback, and I understand why, because I say something like energy work and Qigong, and they think new agey kind of crystal gazer, a spaced out, DMT knot. And it's like, I get it. I totally get it. But the whole reason why I think this work is so important is because I'm recontextualizing what I have learned from Eastern teachers and presenting it, because they have a magical tradition. I'm not just talking about the Tibetan Buddhists and Dzogchen and all that stuff. I'm I'm talking about the Taoist, esoteric Taoism has an alchemical tradition that is very, very old and very intact. It has a magical tradition, talisman, consecration tradition, the Fu sigils and things like that. Benabel Wen, who is one of my absolute favorite scholar practitioners, she wrote an incredible book called The Tao of Craft, detailing the Fu sigil talisman tradition of esoteric Taoism in the East. And so I'd recommend anybody who's interested in finding out more about Taoist magic to look at her work, because her work is outstanding. She makes me look like a monkey. So, but so it's, there is that pushback, and I'm trying to sort of let those people understand, like, this stuff is real, and I'm going to show you how to use it, because there is a sensation, and it's not only just a body knowing, it's a body feeling. I develop awareness of the energy for the first time because I started feeling it, and it like turned me into a belief. Like, okay, I get it. I get the whole chi thing. Also, like, some of the non-Eastern teachers that were at that school that I went to, it was mostly, I would say, the majority Asian teachers, like from Asia, from China, that came here. And but the Western teachers, they would always say, like, chi is, we don't know, the meridians seem to run along fascia lines. Like, why are you teaching this if you don't even believe in the foundational? You got to like science-ify it in your head in order to feel okay about it. No, grow some balls, own what you do, right? Maybe suspend your disbelief and you need to shoehorn it into your existing paradigm, and you'll grow a little bit. So there's this whole idea where it's like, people they need to become believers in it. But one of the best ways is teaching people how to feel it and how to see it. So there's a visual component. There's a palpatory component where you're actually feeling this stuff, and that coming to awareness, kind of like you alluded to, is what I consider like a lesser alchemical marriage of Sol and Luna, where it's you have this latent energy field, etheric field, this radiant kind of fluidic light, for lack of a more concise term. And insofar as you are not aware of it, it is malleable to other things and other people.
Right.
And because it's fluid, it's liquid like. And these things are mentally, they're mostly mental. There's a saying, where the mind goes, the chi flows. So that's the whole thing, is taking this latent etheric field and connecting it to your conscious mind. And it's like awakening a limb that you didn't know you had. And it comes out of atrophy, and you have to learn how to slowly move the fingers. But once that marriage of the active conscious awareness happens with the latent, impressionable etheric field, now you've sort of turned on. That is an initiation in and of itself, an initiation in fact rather than in ceremony, in form. So, and once that happens, it's your entire state of consciousness begins to undergo a very prolonged renovation. And these things can, kind of develop a little bit seemingly autonomously, independent of your willed, you've got to put a lot of effort forward in the beginning, but then you have to develop ways to sort of shut that off. Otherwise, everything is glowing all the time, and people are moving, and there's this kind of trail, behind this wispy white silvery trail behind them, and it's like, so there are. I give all these techniques to develop the stuff in the book. I give all the warnings. I give all the potential things that are supposed to that could go wrong, and I give the mile markers so you know what you're doing right. I've studied this system for a really long time, and in tandem with a Western mind and Western practice. So I'm going to be able to sort of be a decent filtration unit to sort of transmit and interpret this stuff. So that's, there's definitely a felt component. And once you link your mind up to it, you can move it, you can cultivate it, you can project it outside the body, yes. And there are smarter ways, more strategic ways, healthier ways to do that. And there are actually, more wasteful ways. So I give the strategies where you're not constantly exhausting your etheric field by putting it into talismans and rocks and things like that.
I like how you bring up the point of it is hard work at the beginning, but there does become a point you're pushing the boulder up the hill. But as soon as you get across that horizon, it sort of takes itself. I like that you bring that up, because it feels like it's a lot like working out the body, right? There is a challenge at first, but then at a certain point, the body starts to say, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. It learns, it has its own intelligence. And this etheric body and all of our other variations of bodies that people love to talk about in their levels of the of the human experience is very much related to the physical body in that same way. I think it it feels the same way. It thinks in the same way as our physical form. It's the closest thing to that. And I like that you talked about it relating to water, because from my own experience in feeling it for the first few times actually occurred in the shower, in bodies of water, where there was a certain correspondence with the being immersed and or in water in some way helps you to feel it on a more full level, right? So one of the exercises I think you put in there is the energy chi ball exercise, and that's a very common one that we see all the time. And I think it's an important one. It was for me, especially. It was that moment of bringing the mind to accept that this is for real, right? And that's so important, because we are so stuck here. We are
and people already have a fairly tremendous amount of consciousness in their hands, right? The hands are meant to feel. I don't feel with my shoulder. I don't feel with the bottom of my foot, really, especially now, in Chinese martial arts, you're supposed to feel with the bottom of your foot, but in modern life in the West, I mean, I'm wearing sneakers and boots all the time. I can't feel anything with the bottom of my feet. I can't feel the terrain beneath me. So that's why it's so key to start with the hands. You're used to feeling there. And also, there are 2 points in the Chinese medicine system. They're called PC8, pericardium 8, and they're in about the center of the palm. And there's 2 alternate theories. The right hand is the hand of projection, where you can move this out, and the left hand is the hand of reception, where you can kind of, take the energy in, so you can sort of create this bridge, this palpatory sort of relationship between these 2 points. The other theory is that the dominant hand, whether right or left, is the hand of projection, and then the receptive or non-dominant hand is the point of reception.
Yeah, I think you could use both, as with all things. They're not jail locked into one or the other thing. But there does seem to be a natural proclivity towards that, at least in my own experience, especially within Reiki, other forms of the Eastern energy system. There is a sort of take from the left where I'm receiving, and then a projection from the right. And I've seen that actually come out a lot more in my practice with intonation, projecting through the hand and projecting that etheric energy from voice through the body, through the meridians, and through the hand has been really effective for me. And it was one of those things that when it happened the first time, I was like, oh Lord, what just happened? What just happened? That literally flew out of me. And these moments, when you really tap into them, can be super jarring. And I like how you did touch on that in the book in several ways. Like, these are the markers, like you said, of it's working. And don't be so alarmed, because the first couple of times, for me at least, it was like, whoa, it was those guardian of the threshold moments where you're like, oh, this is real. This is for real. And it's there's a what's the word? A tearing down of the mental facade of that can't be possible, that happens in those embodied moments. And that's why I think, a lot of what you've written in here is so vital to the Western experience. And why I think for a long time, this book is going to be one of those things that people refer to and say, oh, this was the point when the West retrieved some of its attachment to the body. So much of even our philosophy is so disembodied and so mentally based, or even, dare I say, escapist, that we've divorced ourselves from the body. And I think that's why this is so important.
Yeah, and I am an extremely somatic person. I worked in body work. I was a Western boxer, and I practiced martial arts. I was, a drummer, a guitar player, vocalist. I worked out my whole life, played sports, and that's, not always the case for magicians. A lot of them come straight out of, like, I don't know, stage crew, or say the theater, group. I was, it's a little weird, I'm just very, very anchored in my body. In fact, it actually took me a lot of practice to be able to do things like astral travel and that kind of stuff, the disembodied kind of experiences. And it's one of the reasons I've had them, and I continue to have them. I do them at will now, instead of, like, let's say, taking a drug that would make you sort of disassociate a little bit and have some of those out-of-body experiences like DMT, and so I've done that stuff too. But it's not the same as being able to cultivate it at will, because I don't like those experiences of getting shot out of my body, because I'm very anchored here, and, like, my soul is in my body. Like, this is where it's supposed to be, so I need to be here. And well, because in the Eastern tradition too, the human, the magician, walks, right? So you have the yin and the yang, and you have the Tao is the line, that kind of that serpentine line is the Tao, and the practitioner walks that line, and thereby bridges heaven and earth. I mean, there's a hermetic, as above, so below. We are the meeting ground of that place. So, I feel comfortable in my body, and I had to somatize the magic to a degree. And There is a lot there. A lot of it got thrown out the window as pseudoscience. You know, I talk all about the work of Franz Anton Mesmer and people like him, right? So the book gives, you know, history, theory, and practice. A lot of practice, but you know, for anybody that is interested in where this stuff comes from and when it has sort of peaked its head up in the Western tradition, much of your starting material is going to be there. There are a lot of people that have talked about this, you know, and some more reputable than others, but it's been with us. It just, there's no instruction. I mean, you're talking about water, right? I mean, like, that was one of the mesmeric healing techniques. They would, you know, charge a glass, give a glass of water that was charged with this, you know, this fluidic substance that he would talked about. You know, that he even Mesmer talked about it moving like water, and he'd give it to a patient, and it would, you know, be sort of a health tonic for them, like almost a cure-all. And then they, you know, when he was practicing in these centers and teaching people, they use huge vats of water to charge with this with the what he called animal magnetism. He'd give it a magnetic charge. It's very interesting because when you first start experimenting with palpating, feeling, sensing these energies, there's a quality to them that feels like you're pushing two magnets together that are repelling, or sometimes you'll feel the pull, like you're being magnetized towards yourself. It's very strange.
It's I found that it's very much linked to the breath as well. That there is breath is part air and part water. There's a vapor element to it, but I found even with the chi ball exercise that in tune with the breath, that magnetic pull on the inhale will bring the hands closer together almost automatically without your own conscious will, and then expansion will then expand it out with an exhalation. In my own personal anecdotes of experience, Papus talks a great deal about Mesmer and stuff of that nature. I think it was very much alive in his time, where they were starting to see that, and they had influence, of course, from the East, but I think that tradition is not as far removed as we would think. I think historically,
well, Mesmer spent, I think he spent a good amount of time in Paris. He had to move there. He moved there. And so, and he was, before this era that we're talking about, but he was a tremendous influence on Éliphas Lévi. Tremendous. Lévi's Azot, the magical agent, the agent by which all magic is accomplished, is magnetism. And he got it, it was these circles that were using Mesmer's animal magnetism. Now, here's the thing. I'm not pulling that out of my ass. Lévi is normally extremely abstruse, obscure, like almost obnoxiously so. Where you're thinking to yourself, this man hid more than he revealed. But there is a treatise, a little known treatise, a little pamphlet. And I got this many, many years before I understood any of this stuff at a little place called Namaste Books in New York on 14th Street, which I just revisited a couple of weeks ago when I was up speaking for the Grand Lodge. I went into that shop and it's still there, and they got a pretty decent selection of books. And I got this little pamphlet, and it's in this little rare paragraph, and it's a pamphlet called The Science of Hermes. And he says it explicitly. The Azot, the magical agent, is none other than magnetized electricity. And that was his way of talking about magnetism and this bioluminosity, this bioelectric field, really. And I put, I've got the citation in there, so you can go see who the publisher is and what page it's on. Llewellyn was really very, very much so, more than I thought. They were very, very conscientious about citations, which I think in the modern age, right, like what's happening in magic right now is actually really good, because readership really wants that. I mean, there's been a resounding demand for it, and so that they really made me sort of dot
That's
my
good.
I's and cross my T's. Yeah, and it's great to have a really, really sharp thorough team of people behind you, holding you accountable for certain things. Because I mean, yes, I have this massive library, but it's you know, you're not always as you're going, like, you know, writing down the page where you in what book you found this. You're just kind of in the beginning, especially when you're writing a book, you're just culling your ideas together. It's sort of, you know, this overall harvest of chopping down the wheat, and then you go and separate the chaff from the grain later and refine. But yeah, so there was a lot of that, and Lévi, as we know, influenced, you know, Papists or Papu, however you want to say it.
Papu,
and,
yeah.
and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I mean,
and Papu calls it the astral fluid.
Yes,
which is
absolutely
really interesting. And when I read that,
it's fluid. It moves like liquid.
It's a light fluid. Light and fluid is how he describes it. And I think that's in elementary. What is it? His book,
Elementary Treatise on Practical Magic. Yes,
that's the one. That's a really good
one.
There's
a lot of that kind of stuff in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and his the other one that Greer recently helped out with, the occult sciences one. He talks about it in great detail there as well. I'll put those in the show description for anybody who's interested, because I think that what you've written is a future forward version of what they were trying to do in that Parisian current of that time. That's why when you sent me the book, I read it, I looked through it, and I started reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is what they were trying to communicate in France that I feel was so missing in the English side of things that came down later. It became too mental. And I think that might be language. It might be something in the English that there's just, it's so choppy compared to, say, the fluidity of a Romance language like French. And I think language has so much to do with it too. But these are things that you track back, you look at the Neoplatonists, Iamblichus would have been very on board with many of these practices. Even Plotinus, even Plotinus would have been. And so I wanted to get to some of the other pieces of the book really quickly, something like you talk about the body talisman technique. Can you tell us a little bit about that without spoiling it in the book? Whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, actually, and to your point about, you know, the Iamblician and the Neoplatonic current, yeah, they had it. And I put it in the book too, the Avgoedi Soma and the Okima Pneumaticon, the luminous body, the spiritual vehicle. I mean, that's what this thing that we're talking about is. So we're not
Okima.
Yeah, we're not exactly. We're not like, this isn't new agey. You know, people like the New Age made it. They made it like all this fluffy, cheesy kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You figure out what's real about what is of substance with this.
It works. Intended. That's why they were talking about it. That's why it became popular, is because it does work.
Not only that, but I mean, Dr. Shaw, Gregory Shaw, in his book Hellenic Tantra, he puts it the best. And I think he's elaborating another scholar. I cannot remember their name, so forgive me. But I think he's commenting on another scholar, or maybe even quoting. But the gist of the message was, to Iamblichus and the early theurgists, all theurgy was theurgy of the luminous body. All of it. Because that was where the gods were received. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't actually go anywhere in theurgy. Your physical body isn't soaring. I mean, come on. We're not a bunch of bumbling literalists here, like, right? So we're not flying in some sort of chariot through the spheres. We're going inside. The nous, the psyche, the highest part of the soul, is having that experience of catabasis and then anabasis. The catabasis is going inwards, literally closing my eyes, going inwards to then go, you know, to have this experience of rising, quote unquote, in the planes of consciousness.
You have to go in the body.
Exactly. So all of that was about healing, rectifying, purifying, strengthening. And
Yeah,
they
it's a
thought of,
purgation of that field.
yes, yeah, a purification, but what does that purification really mean? And we have it on the record, the catharsis, according to the Neoplatonic theurgist, was, becoming like to God as we possibly can. And so there's that whole concept that on entry into the material cosmos from the hypercosmic realms, the soul has to, it can't just come into the universe. It has to be in a carriage, in a vessel. And that vessel is spirit, right? Pneuma in the Greek, which corresponds to chi and prana and,
Breath.
in ruach. Yes, the same thing. And so as that soul, which is spherical, the soul is kind of put in this aura, this bubble, and as it descends closer to it, what will be its physical body, it becomes bam damaged. In the Hermetic tradition, it's traumatized. In the Neoplatonic tradition, the sort of Neo-Pythagorean tradition, what was spherical becomes angular. And so we have, what are we talking about? We talk about the aura and all that stuff, and that is our center of power. That is like, we are the circumpunct. We are the dot at the center of the circumpunct, right? And so this is our container. In the Golden Dawn community, we call it the sphere of sensation, but it's also it's synonymously referred to as the magical mirror of the universe, because it is the 360-degree omnidirectional view you have from the center of your microcosm, the outermost boundaries of which is what we would call the aura. It's, that's your sphere of influence, literally. And so that body talisman technique is essentially using the techniques that we have developed of visualization, of invocation. And like you said, I'm not going to go too into it because it's fairly involved in terms theoretically. You're using this idea of the microcosm and the macrocosm, and that in order to be able to successfully draw in things from the macrocosm to literally, as they say, draw down the moon, you must first summon it completely in yourself. So what we would say is that you must, if you want to do a lunar talisman, you must become the hierophant of the moon. What does that mean? It means saturating your sphere of sensation with the energies of the lunar, hierarchy of correspondences, and awakening.
You become a living talisman.
Exactly. You become a living talisman of the ontology, the being of the moon, which, the moon itself as a physical, as a luminary, or, we would call it a planet in the traditional, magical kind of worldview. The actual body itself is just a midway point. It may even be the lowest point on its, it's actually not the lowest point. The lowest point is the synthemata. But that is present here in the earth. But it's a mediating point between the higher levels, the disembodied levels of its being, right? And so we're tapping into that by saturating our sphere of sensation completely and thoroughly with those energies. How do you do that? Well, Iamblichus told us, Agrippa tells us, you use all the materia, the symbola and the synthemata, in order to generate that in your consciousness. And by sort of bringing that energy to the fore, to the exclusion of other ones, they're all there working in the background, right? Because we can't just pull these things out of us. But to bringing that to the fore has an attraction, so that you reach up, and then the actual macrocosmic energies reach down. And again, right, what do we say
Just
before?
like the hands.
Bridging heaven and earth, the above and the below.
Yeah, it's that it's the activation of the signatures within yourself, right? The synthemata have those signatures within them. You bring them into your field, and that's what creates that magnetic attraction to the moon. At least that's it. The way I try to piece it together myself is by the accumulation of those signatures. We are calibrating our body to what those are. So that's what creates that pull, is that is that right there. Our body, we're the nexus, like you said. It's that mirror, and that I think is something that's missed. Like you see something in a book and you say, okay, I got to gather all these pieces, but there's a knowledge aspect to it that's very easy for us in the West to say, okay, I gather all these pieces and then now we're done. The understanding of that, though, comes through that repetition of practice, I think. But there is an aha moment where you're like, oh, these are pointing to me. They're not pointing to something else outside of me. They're supposed to awaken that within me that has, as you said, lain dormant or is latent or just needs to remember what it is for the time being. And then once you learn how to channel it, you learn all the correspondences. That's where that marriage begins, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that we could talk about. We're coming up on about 47 minutes here, and I don't want to steal a ton of your time. So I'd like to switch gears just a little bit, unless you have anything else you want to talk about with the book. When is the date?
Yeah, so it's coming out so far. I think the precise date is April 8th of this year, 2025. It's being published by Llewellyn Worldwide. You can pre-order it right now on Llewellyn's website. You can pre-order it on Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. Really, it'll be distributed through those retailers. I'm going to be doing a talk on April. Oh gosh, April. I'm doing a talk in April. I'll look it up now. Talk in April at Watkins Books in London. So I'm going to be doing a full presentation and workshop on site at Watkins Books, and you'll be able to buy the book in person from me there, as well as there'll be a book signing as well. That'll also be streamed on the Watkins YouTube channel. So I'm doing a whole sort of book tour. I'll be at Philosophical Research Society in June, and a whole bunch of other places. I've got the dates up. We've got the dates up on Llewellyn, and I've got them up on ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. So look for me, because I'm going to be probably passing through or somewhere near your town this year.
Awesome. I'll put all the links as well in the show notes when we release this. What I want to transition to now is your immersive experience in Egypt. Let's talk about what you're doing out there. It seems incredible. I will be with you in spirit.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about this immersive experience and when it is.
Sure. Oh, by the way, I looked it up. April 24th, I'm at Watkins in London.
Okay.
So it's called Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Theurgy. And essentially, it's going to be this October 18th through the 26th of 2025. It'll be a 9-day field immersive excursion. So what does that mean? We're going to be on site in Egypt. It's not going to be videotaped. It's not going to be recorded. This is going to be, you got to be there, or you don't see it. And I don't know, logistically, this has been quite heavy. So
Sure.
I don't know that I'm going to do this again. So for anybody that's interested, registration ends at the end of this month. I would recommend reaching out to me, and we can talk about all the details of pricing and et cetera, and how we're getting there and the safety, all that stuff. But this will be my third time in Egypt, and it won't be my first time doing like on-site ritual or energy work or vision work, that kind of stuff. But it'll be the first time having some of these places to myself. So we're going to be traveling through Upper and Lower Egypt. We're going to be starting at the Cairo Museum, and then moving forward, obviously, we'll be at the Giza Plateau. We're going to be going to the Saqqara Necropolis. and seeing some of the pyramids there. We're going to be going to we'll have private access to the Temple of Hathor at Dendara. We'll have private access to the Osirian at Abydos. We'll have private access to some of the goddess sanctuaries at in Luxor. So it's going to be quite an extensive trip. And what we're doing there is I'm going to be teaching a group of 16 participants the history, theory, and practice of these techniques of ancient theurgy, and they are primarily reconstructed from many sources. But I would say things like the Chaldean oracles, De Mysteriis by Iamblichus, On the Hieratic Art by Proclus, also using his Platonic theology as a backdrop, using De Anima by Iamblichus, which talks about the luminous body, using some of the works of Michael Sellis, the PGM for certain things. It's going to be, I've used probably around, if not over 60 primary sources to one degree or another to reconstruct these rituals based on my previous training and ongoing experimentation with theurgic ritual. And so this will be as authentic as you're going to find it, in terms of an actual ritual praxis. So I've broken them down into techniques that are sequential and successive and sort of build on a foundation. Learning about epiclesis, and invocation, prosyche, prayer. That's a basic component of ritual. But how did they do it? They're using the Barbara onomata and the Asema onomata, the barbarous names of evocation, the sort of meaningless names of evocation. There are certain ways, postures they would adopt, the way that they would sort of have this interplay and exchange of words and perspective. And then moving on to things like telestike, right? So talismanic consecrations, also how initiations serve as a talismanic consecration, except the initiate, is the talisman. And then also things like statue animation, which I'll be teaching. And be doing on-site consecration of these. I'm making everybody a small lotus wand. And so we'll be using, it'll be custom made for each participant, and then we'll be consecrating those on site. We'll be covering the Hellenistic astrology of the time, all sorts of stuff. Theoria also. We'll be doing visualizations, contemplations, meditations, really kind of working that muscle of the mind's eye, talking about the Avgoedi Soma, the Okima Pneumaticon, the luminous body and the spiritual vehicles, and practicing some of these things, right? They were practices that they had, at least for purification. A lot of that had to do with diet and lifestyle, but there are certainly ritual techniques. One in particular that I've kind of pulled together from On the Mysteries, De Mysteriis, and the PGM, right? For particularly a section of the Mithras liturgy where it talks about, taking in the rays of the sun, of Ilios, and that was what they did, according to the Neoplatonic theurgists. There was a component where you would literally stand in the sun, that kind of thing.
Sun gazing.
Yeah. Yes. So there's all sorts of stuff. I have a full rundown on the Arcanum YouTube channel, ARCANVM, and I go through the full itinerary. There's a promo video up there too. And for anybody that is interested or has any questions, check out those videos, or come onto my website, ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. There's a little sort of texting widget that will pop up and say, do you want to ask me a question? And you can contact me there, because that'll go directly to my personal inbox. and obviously I'm prioritizing those messages. So
Yeah,
reach
to fill
out
the
to me there.
spaces. Yeah, well, this video will go out this week, so we'll have some time to hopefully get some people into you. That's awesome. It sounds like an incredible experience. Are there any prerequisite knowledge anybody might need if they were thinking about taking this on?
I mean, the more you understand about,
The more you're going to get.
Really Greco-Egyptian theurgy, which, because it's also it's in the Hermetic tradition. We have it, we have literally the ritual blueprints and the brief descriptions of the experiences in things like, Discourse on the 8th and the 9th and the Pymander. So you've got stuff like that. And also Iamblichus was he didn't say that this stuff originated with the Greeks. He was insistent this is Egyptian.
Yeah.
So yeah, he wrote as this Egyptian priest, Ab-Ammon, writing for all Egyptian priests. And so yeah, he, as Walter Hanegraaff has said, I think very, very accurately, Iamblichus was a hermetist, and so yeah, knowing things like that, being familiar with that milieu, yeah, of course, but you don't need to know any of that, because we're going to, we have 9 days together. And there's also, we're going to start up in April or May, an onboarding sort of thing where there are, as of right now, there are onboarding materials. So this entire trip is not just to go and learn these disparate techniques and go and do it in a beautiful, beautiful location on site where the land itself, the temples were made to be centers of power, that they're still
made for this activity.
Right. And it's still there, but there's also a component where I've curated the material so that it's going to be a personal initiation, an initiatory experience for every practitioner. So to that end, there's also some onboarding materials that they will do privately, and they won't inform me or anybody else as to how it goes or what they ended up doing. There's that. There will be some educational material, and we're going to start a book club after registration ends. So April or May, where we'll be meeting regularly, most likely once or twice a month, to talk about the trip logistics and also go through, some of the selected text, like a selected bibliography, and kind of work with this stuff together and prepare for it. And I think that value. You'll be able to ask questions like this, and we can work to answers together.
Awesome. All right, brother. What else do you got coming up on ARCANVM? What's popping this year?
I've got an awesome season of podcasts coming up. That is coming out on the equinox, March 20th. I'm going to be debuting the first episode, which is with Walter Hanegraaff. And I've got some great guests: Dana Trell, Tobias Churton, Sasha Chaita. It's going to be fantastic. And I've also, after a year of hiatus making documentary style presentations, I'm going to be starting back with that. I've got a new kind of setup and a new way of doing the videos that I think people are really going to enjoy. So covering excellent topics, things that I think, I laid the groundwork for. That's a lot of ARCANVM in the beginning was an introduction to Neoplatonism, Hermetism, Plato, magic in general, ritual magic, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Now it's going to take it a step further. There'll be more practical stuff. And I'm also starting a community for people who, there will be, I'm in the process of compiling, there will be hundreds of videos on actionable things. There will be obviously a component where it's like history and theory. Absolutely. But you're going to learn any and all types of magic that you want to learn, because I've done almost some variation of all of it at this point. Chaos magic, hoodoo, all that. I've done it. That's where I don't, you got to focus on like one thing when you're putting videos out and writing books as much as you can. So, but this will be a really nice kind of way for people to learn pretty much anything that they feel called to, from somebody who's not going to make them, there's tons of great resources out there and channels and Patreons and stuff, but you're not learning magic from a lot of them. You don't have somebody with practitioner insight telling you like, yeah, okay, when this happens, you're onto something, or when this happens, no, you got to be careful with that, and,
Yeah.
and that is really invaluable. And that's why I joined orders, because people taught me that stuff. And so, yeah, so that's most of it. I have a newsletter that is essentially, until the community is out, I'll have a newsletter running, and it's totally free. You just you can subscribe on my webpage. There's a newsletter. There's a little pop-up thing that says, subscribe to the newsletter, but it's not going to just be like these updates and, whacking you over the head with what I'm doing and where I'm speaking. These are going to be high value, sort of longer format newsletters where I'm covering certain topics in detail and offering as much value as possible for free. But basically, you pay with your email. So there's that. Sign up on my website, ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER, and the community should be up this summer.
Sounds great, brother. Thanks so much for joining me again. It's been a wonderful talk as usual. I can't wait for the book to release, see how well everybody receives it. If you guys are interested in this, seriously pick this book up. It's one of those things that I think will be a classic for years to come.
Thank you, man.
I genuinely mean that. It's sorely needed, especially in the Wild West of internet occultism. You see so much of a disembodied element to practice, so much obsession with all of the mental projections and all of that bringing things back down to a simpler, not as simpler in like complexity, but simpler in understanding that this is an embodied experience that we have to have. That's why I think it's so valuable. And I want to thank you for coming on, man. It's been great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to talk to you twice in like a week and a half or a week. So it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And your channel is doing excellent. And I pray it continues to just sort of soar through to the point where you're way above the weather, man.
That would be great. It's been wonderful. And I want to thank everybody who watches all of these for all of the wonderful reception. It's just a sign for me that the gods are speaking through me in some way, shape, or form. That's when people resonate with what your message is. It feels good, but it also, there's a purpose element to it. And I'm sure you experience that as well with all your work, that it fills the soul with a sort of glee and gratitude that makes you want to keep going and do it